This is another interesting edition of the Market Review where we discuss key developments in the financial and capital market as they affect the economy. Our focus today will be on the capital market as a catalyst to the development of Nigeria's agricultural sector. And my guest is Mrs. Elile Olutimayin. She's the Chairman Planning Committee for the 26th Annual Stockbrokers Conference, or you may call it the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers Summit. It's nice to have you on the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
We know that 48 hours from now, you'll be hosting the 26th Annual Summit of Stockbrokers, and we wish you all the best ahead. But before we go on to the conversation, let's give you a wrap of some of the stories from last week. Sequel to his announcement on May 18, 2022, Access Holdings PLC Trading as Access Corporations notified the public that the subsidiary Access Bank PLC has completed the divestment of its entire equity interest in Access Pension Fund Custodian Limited to First Pension Custodian Nigeria Limited, a subsidiary of First Bank of Nigeria Limited. The transaction received the full approval of the relevant regulatory agencies. Also last week, Nigeria Exchange Limited said it remains committed to positioning the Nigerian capital market as a global investment destination for stakeholders. Mr. Jude Chiemeka, Divisional Head, Capital Markets, Nigeria Exchange Limited, disclosed this at the NGX Index Circuit Breaker webinar. And also it was another eventful activity for the FMDQ Exchange as they announced the approval for the quotation of Coleman Technical Industries Limited 2.51 billion naira Series 5 and 7.50 billion naira Series 6 commercial papers under its 20 billion commercial paper issuance program on its platform. Those were some of the interesting stories from last week. If you're joining us, it's the Market Review program, and today we're looking at the capital market as a catalyst for the growth of Nigeria's agricultural sector. And my guest is Mrs. Elile Olutimayin. She's the chairman of the Conference Planning Committee for the 26th Annual Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers Summit, which is coming up this week, 8th to 9th. That's Thursday, so 48 hours from now. The conference will begin in the very notable city of Benin, capital of Edo State. And so we'll be discussing around it. Of course, its trust is around unlocking opportunities in the capital market through development of the agricultural sector. So the synergy between the capital market and the agricultural sector and ways forward will be the thrust of this conference. So it's interesting to have our guests discuss around this. So first, Mrs. Olutimayin, what is the significance of the annual Stockbrokers Conference? You have this every year, but how critical and how important is this to the entire ecosystem?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The significance of the CIS conference, something we've held for the last 25 years, is the focal point. I like to say it's the largest gathering of capital market operators in Nigeria. What we do is typically discuss what are the burning issues in the capital market space, and we bring those issues to bear, address them. And our job also is to try and make sure that we develop government policies around those issues, right? Make inputs, relevant inputs, to government policies that can help, address those issues. So it's a rallying point for capital market operators, brokers, fund managers, operators in the capital market space, also for regulators, for us to have a proper handshake between regulators and the operators. So it is of great importance to the capital market space.
Very, very well. I mean, it's always good for stakeholders in the capital market ecosystem, the brokers and other players to come together to see how the market can grow and make impact, because the capital market is a reflection of our economy, and everything that happens around it must, of course, reflect that. So let's look at the theme for this year. Can you share with us why the CIS decided to focus on the theme capital market and agricultural development in Nigeria, issues and the way forward? Because the agricultural sector, even if you look at the second quarter 2022 GDP report for Nigeria, it showed that, of course, it's still a big player contributing to Nigeria's economy.
Maybe I'll throw that question back to you to say, why not Agric, right? Agric is the largest employer of labor, right? Especially in rural areas. Yeah. And if you agree with me, there's still a lot of room for development in that space, right? We've talked about processing, different part of the value chain in the Agric space. There's still a lot of room for capital, investment, in that space. And given that, we're going to Edo State this time around, Edo State is a state that is also thriving in the agric space. We decided, why don't we just own in on agric? What are the issues in agric? How can the capital markets, solve or address the issues in that, in that sector?
This is very important because Edo State you're going to, recently the governor was talking about even leveraging its forestry resources. Of course, you know that there are two major oil palm companies listed on the exchange are there, Okumu Oil Palm and Presco. So yeah, it's interesting that you're taking this to Benin, Edo State, where at a time that the country is really pushing for full diversification of revenue sources, don't depend much on the federal account allocation committee, what they have to release from Abuja every time. States need to be viable, but that's interesting. So can you tell us or share with us the areas of focus for driving this theme and discourse at the summit? What are the kind of topical issues that will be raised?
So you have mentioned two of the publicly listed companies. They will play a key role even at the conference.
Interesting. I didn't get off the back.
Yeah, exactly. So while we were just talking, I was like, oh, I think you were part of our meeting when we're discussing this. So they'll play a key role, and we'll be looking at what are the problems they face in that space. Sometimes, a lot of the times, we talk about it without getting those in that sector involved. So what are the issues they face in that space? Delving into what are the issues they face. How can capital market address those issues? Like I mentioned, there's still a lot of room for improvement in terms of investment in that space. So we'll have those two publicly listed companies that are based in Edo State playing a key role, and we'll be doing factory visits to their factory to see what exactly they are doing. So it's also an expository one for us, for members that will be attending the conference, because we'll be looking at how we'll be going to both Okumu and Presco to see the factory and ask them questions and get to know the company more. So I think that issues around would yet that day, I can just tell you to probably keep your fingers crossed, but we'll have operators in that space coming to discuss issues that borders those in the agric space.
So we know that, of course, it's happening in Edo State, and the governor of Edo State, Mr. Godwin Obaseki, is a chartered stockbroker. So he will be at home with his community. But beyond that also, he's the chief host, special guest of honor. Who are the other critical stakeholders we're expecting? Obviously, we should expect that the Minister of Agriculture should be there, other key stakeholders and policymakers, even the National Assembly, because it's always good to have that whole nexus of leaders coming together to see how they can be a synergy in policy, in advocacy, and implementation of steps that will help the capital market support what the agric sector is doing to further boost the economy.
Yeah, so you're spot on. Yes, we'll have government, key government officials at the event. We have the Edo State governor. Also, government officials from Edo State government will also be there. I've mentioned Okumu, I've mentioned Presco. We also have brokers, other members of the capital market. And we have guests and speakers, both locally and internationally, that will be attending. It's a hybrid event, so for those who can't be there in Benin City, can always join us online to participate.
Hybrid, yeah. Okay. I think that's an interesting part, hybrid. If you look at post-COVID, we've seen a lot of activities like conferences now having the hybrid format just to boost inclusivity, because before it was more of you have to be there at the events to feel it. So that's another interesting part. But let's look at something that, of course, is of interest for us in ProShare WebTV. We've continued to cover the market, particularly the commodities ecosystem. So against the background of the need for the federal government to exploit opportunities in the commodity space to grow the economy, what are your thoughts around how this conference can further galvanize this? Because, of course, on our program in Market Review, we've engaged our first Commodities Exchange, who are doing remarkably. And also recently, you are aware of the launch of the Lagos Commodities and Futures Exchange, which again, significant step in boosting the ecosystem. And prior to now, the Central Bank of Nigeria has played a major stake in the Nigeria Commodities Exchange in Abuja. So looking at the whole commodities ecosystem and how they can contribute to our economy, What are your expectations from this conference in further bringing this ecosystem together to boost and address what are the issues so that they can further support the agri sector?
So what we have done is to dedicate a session to commodities exchange and agri development. And most of the people you have mentioned will be also at the conference. Key players in the commodities ecosystem will be at the conference. So we'll be discussing issues around how can we have that perfect handshake between the commodities space and an agri development in Nigeria. So yes, we have dedicated a session to that.
Yes. Also, apart from the Okumu and of course Presco and the Commodities Exchange, there are some other companies. I mean, there's Elile, there are other agri-based companies that are really doing a lot in terms of supporting even the foods company, the Boa Foods, the Dangote fertilizer plant. That one's not yet listed. But there's several activities in the agri value chain and prospects. Are there sessions to cover that also?
Would have loved to cover a lot of sessions, right? But we do think that, the session that we have a broader session that will cover processing also. And that's the session.
A very important aspect, of course, in the whole agri value chain, the processing activity. Yeah.
So we do believe that that main session we have on Agric will cover processing, will cover funding, will cover different areas or different aspects of, the agri value chain.
Yes, yes. And we also know that logistics, the state of insecurity has also been one of the challenges facing the agri sector, and its opportunity to unlock and further support the growth and development of the economy. And we expect that this conversation will also look at that in terms of a policy discourse with the governor and of course policymakers we're expecting. I believe that's the case.
Yeah, we'll be discussing issues that bother them, and whether we like it or not, in the Nigeria of today, security is an issue that we also have to discuss. But that's at the government's table. But there'll be conversations around what are the issues that the agri space is facing today, and that will be fully discussed and deliberated on.
And our expectation also from here is that some major agri business entities and major agri companies who we expect have been reached out for this conference will consider coming to the market to list, because that will also further boost capitalization. I think you share that same sentiment.
I share the same sentiment with you. I'm a capital market player, so I share the same sentiment. What will grow our market, right? This is part of the reasons why we have this conference, to have conversations around how do we grow or how do we develop the capital market. So we are hoping that this will bring more focus in the agri space. Also endear those in the agri space to the capital market too. Yeah. So yes, we do look forward to more listing on the Nigerian Stock Exchange or the Stock Exchange.
Yeah. Very, very fair enough. And we'll be monitoring that, because that's very important. The essence of the Nigerian capital market, reflecting the economy, is that if our GDP, the agri sector is a big contributor, therefore we should reflect in the capital market through various companies participating. So it needs to be more captured and of course more involved and driving activities. So of course the examples you've given, the Okumu, Presco, Elile and others, show a lot of prospects that we should attract more of these major companies into the market. Yes. So as we ramp up, Ms. Elile, what would you like to say to stakeholders as we look at this very interesting summit? It's always an interesting event, and one aspect we always look forward to is a communique. So are we getting a robust communique that will be transmitted to policymakers, legislators, and other key influencers in the ecosystem?
Definitely. Without the communique, we would have met in vain, right? We would have had a meeting in vain. So the communique is very critical to the conversations we would have had at the conference. That's the only way we can move forward. And that's the only input we'll have to government stakeholders to say, oh, how can we develop or how can we improve the policies we have on the ground? So definitely there will be a communique that will be communicated to all stakeholders.
Yeah. Looking at the past summits, we've seen the advocacy from the mutualization to even, of course, the materialization, improving data to build a robust market, and particularly serving more for the retail investors. So we hope that this also, bringing the agricultural sector to the fore, will unlock more opportunities and make the market more visible as a partner and engine for development. But thank you very much, Mrs. Elile Olutimayin, for this very interesting conversation. Chairman, Conference Planning Committee. Not always easy to chair massive planning organization, but we know the women have always shown that they can do it. I mean, several women have done that, and of course, you will be an exception. So it's nice to see what the women can do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So wishing you a very successful summit 48 hours from now. And of course, we'll be monitoring the developments, of course, from that summit and how the capital market will be at the pivot of boosting agri sector's contribution to our economy and, of course, overall shared prosperity for our nation. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you so much.
Yes, that's the conversation. Of course, it's the big one this week. It's happening from Thursday the 8th and to the 9th. That's a Friday this week, September 2022. The 26th Annual Summit of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, discussing the capital market and agriculture and how it can grow and further support economic development. So we'll be monitoring developments around it and how our stakeholders are ready to engage further to see the synergy between the capital markets and the agri sector. Commodities exchanges are emerging and doing a lot, but there's a lot more work to be done. And that'll be all for this edition of the Market Review. If you have questions or suggestions on today's episode and our conversation, please send an email to otobasi.abasecon@proshare.co. Also, you can join our website, www.proshare.co, to read our latest news articles, stories, and reports on the capital market. We also, of course, published the release for this conference. So you want to get further information around it, you can log on to our website. Engage us via social media platforms displayed on the screen. Don't forget that you need to be informed to make the right investment decisions. Thank you for watching, and keep discussing the financial and capital markets because they create wealth and economic opportunities.